Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we're going to be talking about something that many of us try to search for sometimes entire lifetimes and perhaps get glimpses of but never seem to achieve. But what happens when an individual has this opportunity to awaken into what is known as the enlightened state? Well, that's what happened with our guest more than 9 years ago, where he just simply awoken to know that but is that underlying reality which is the foundation of all existed, manifested in a human form. Most people try to meditate for it, exercise for it, perhaps find religious practices, even travel around the world searching for the possibility of this being able to happen. But it just simply happened to this individual. We're going to find out today how this happened and what this is all about, and perhaps how you, the listeners, can find out the possibilities of this happening to you. He shares his experience through talks, workshops, and retreats, as well as other events both here in the United States and in India. And in 2009, together with his wife, he founded what is known as New Dharma to support his teachings. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Sat Shree. Sat Shree, how are you today?
I'm very good.
You're in an enlightened state. I would think you were doing excellent.
Pretty much when people ask me how I am doing, I say it's irrelevant.
You know, that's what I love about enlightened beings is they always have something that other people don't typically say. Give our listeners an idea what happened here and what this is all about here.
Well, it's a large conversation, but I find it's kind of in line with the purpose of your radio station, Beyond 50, which is, what happens in the last stages of our life. And it's curious because my awakening occurred in my 50th year, and I pretty much exited, I didn't know it at the time, permanently the human paradigm, and discovered what I've discovered, and pretty much that's what I teach. So I'll share a little bit. For me, I was not seeking. This was 1998. It was late at night, January 4th. I'm working in my office workshop downstairs. I was very busy. I was an architect. I've been an architect for 25 years. And living a good life. I'm living in a beautiful place near the Sierra Nevadas and in the high desert. My wife and my children. I had my own business. I enjoyed myself skiing and hiking. I loved my life. I was not seeking. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't looking for anything. This night, I'm standing at my drafting table, and I'm having this feeling arise up from the bottom of my body as if there's something wrong, like a bowel movement or something. It's very disturbing, and it goes up to my stomach, and now I'm experiencing distress. And then it goes into my heart, and I'm experiencing this overwhelming feeling of grief. This is not normal for me. I've pretty much been a happy man all my life. I will say that I've done a lot of wild things, but I had not ever had anything like this happen to me before. And so I was bewildered. I didn't know what was going on, but I couldn't dismiss this overwhelming grief that was occurring. And I tried to get in touch with what was happening, and I couldn't find the source. And then the grief came up to my throat, and it became, I became aware of how I had separated myself from everyone in the world, how my own individual selfishness, my own individual preoccupations and pleasures and enjoyments, how I had lived primarily for myself, excluding other people. But this was way outside of proportion to the life I was living. But the emotion eventually got so large, I realized this was much bigger than me. That this grief I was feeling was beyond any sense. And I had this experience of the evil that exists in all of us, in all of mankind. And I had these glimmers and insights into the nature of this evil. Now I'm beginning to have visions and be in this altered state. And then it reached a crescendo. When it reached this crescendo of anguish and separation and grief and pain and evil, power, control, domination, I lost my consciousness. And I fell asleep. I collapsed on the table. And I don't know how long I was out. It may have been a few seconds or a minute or a few minutes. But when I came back, I was in a complete altered state. I felt connected with the universe. I felt connected. At the time, I didn't know what it was I was feeling. But now I know that I had gotten a glimmer of something. It's as if something had pierced the veil, had penetrated the veil of my individual identity, and I'd seen or come into proximity to something that I had no idea existed. Tears are pouring down my face. I'm feeling like I have just been blessed by the universe, that something had happened that I had no idea could happen. Now, I was in the Bay Area in 1966. I was right in the middle of the movement, and I knew of spirituality and meditation. When I was 19, I was very much into a spiritual teacher for about 6 years. But by the time I got to the age of about 22, 23, I was directed to go back into the world and to live my life. And I basically did that. And in that time, I did a lot of personal development, personal growth, but I did not ever have the kind of experience that occurred on that night. I went upstairs and I walked into the room. My wife was asleep. It was about 1:30 in the morning. And as I opened the door into the room, she sits right up, and tears are pouring down her face, and she's saying, "What's happening? What's happening?" And then at that moment, I knew that whatever was happening to me was being transmitted, and she was affecting it. She was experiencing it. Then I sat on the bed, still in wonder, looked out the window over the desert behind us, and I began to see stars. But suddenly I seemed to be in the middle of the universe. And everywhere I looked, in very real terms, were stars everywhere. And as I was seeing these stars, I began to see these swirling forms between me and the stars. And I was paying attention. I said, "Oh my God, these are semi-intelligent consciousnesses." And then I said, "Oh my God, this whole universe is purposeful. This whole universe has a direction." It's like I woke up to the fact that we're not living in a series of random events where what we do doesn't make any difference, and that it was all interconnected, and there was this great master plan behind all things. This was quite a shock for me because I was a happy agnostic at that point. You know, I didn't need to have heaven, and I didn't mind if when I died that was it. I just went into oblivion. But when I had this experience, it was like, oh shit! You mean how I've lived makes a difference? You mean it's not just me? There's much, much more. Mm-hmm. Now that experience quieted down, and I woke up the next morning, and I went back to work, and I'm very busy at this time. I had an architectural practice. I had bought into a solar energy firm. I was an advocate for passing net metering in the state of Nevada. I was president of my citizen advisory board. I sat on the board of a group that was teaching people how to build sustainable buildings, and I was arguing with building departments to allow them to build their straw houses. So I was involved in many, many things. My life was full, and I walked back into this the next day, and just for the rest of the week, was completely engaged. I was in a great mood, but what I felt was, well, I had one of those Maslow peak experiences, and, you know, that was great. Mark that one up. I had one of those, and went on with my life until the next weekend, and my wife and I went out to a movie with our daughter, and on the way home, I'm driving, coming around the lake to our house, and this force descends into my body. And it feels like 400 pounds of bliss filling up my whole body. And I'm bewildered. I have no idea what to do with this. I've never had anything like this. And my wife says, pull off the road, you can't drive, because I could barely move. And I stagger out of the car and get onto the other side. She takes me home, and I sit in this chair, and these waves and waves of bliss descend into my body, and I'm feeling as if I'm being made love to by the universe. And all the time this is going on, I'm not doing anything. My mind is sitting there, my rational mind, just like you hear speaking right now, is sitting like a fly on the wall and saying, what the hell's going on here? Why is this happening? I don't use drugs. I don't drink alcohol. You know, I'm a runner and a hiker. I don't have any of these things. What's going on? But there was no fear. I didn't have any fear. I knew that whatever was happening was a gift, like the lottery of all lotteries. So then what I noticed is, then I went to work the next week, and the next weekend when I had a little time off, it came in again. And then the next weekend it came in again. And then pretty soon it started interrupting me in my day-to-day work. And after a few months, my wife and I were trying to research this. We were asking our Buddhist friends, what happened? How did this happen? But nobody could explain it. And eventually I met a woman who ended up to be the devotee of my first teacher that I came to. But she said to me, well, when the fruit is ripe, it falls. And as soon as she said that to me, I said, oh my God, this is just a natural unfolding. And if it's happening to me, it's got to be happening everywhere. There's nothing unique with this person. And that what is it behind here? What are the principles? What's going on? And then how can I collaborate with it? How can I, wherever this is going, how can I go there? And these were the questions. Eventually I found, a friend gave me a video of the person who proved to be my teacher, Shree, and it was about the soul. And when I put this video on in my workshop, which I would watch movies while I draft, and this video came on, and I went into this intoxicated rapture. It was almost like a madness. I could not contain what I was experiencing when I saw him speaking and talking about the soul. And this overwhelming feeling was, whatever he has is the completion of what has started with me. And at that moment, I knew that this was my teacher. And this intoxication was driving me batty. My wife drove me up to this place where this woman who told me that when the fruit is ripe, it drops. And this was her teacher. And I described my feeling, and she said, well, he's in India. He lives in India. I'll call him tonight, come back tomorrow, and I'll record the conversation. And when I came back the next day, the whole night I'm intoxicated. I'm not sleeping. I'm in states of ecstasy and bliss. I'm walking around. I'm like a madman. I'm taken up in the next morning, and as soon as I heard his voice on the recording, my whole system quieted. And he seemed to know who I was. He gave me instructions. He told me I was in a state of ecstasy, and that it was the indication of something that was yet to come, and that he would be coming in 9 months, and he would give me direct personal guidance. And in that 9 months period, I was starting to live, and I was living more stably in this altered state. It was literally, I could function, I could talk, I could do my business, but I knew that it was no longer relevant. I knew that all this thing of my life that I had spent 50 years building and creating was no longer important. It was just the byproduct of something that I had left behind. But I was perfectly happily fulfilling all the work that needed to be done, but I knew I needed to simplify. So I sold all my things, gave away my architectural projects that I couldn't complete, I resigned from my positions in the community, and I began to experience the subtle inner worlds. And in those periods of time, I was shown all the different inner dimensions that exist between our human normal state of consciousness and the absolute truth. And in that process, we were getting glimmers of all of this. It was all revelations and bliss and experiences that went on that were, we don't have enough time to talk about it, but it was it showing me the nature of this world when we pierce the veil, the envelope, the membrane that keeps us separate from it in our human life. So all of us are actually swimming in this ocean of forces and beings and energies that we're oblivious to because we have a body. It's like every body has its own membrane that separates it from this dimension so that we can live this small, little, sensory-based, mind-based, emotional, sensual-based human life. We're living in a bubble. So for me, I never knew that this dimension existed. I was not a psychic person. I was rational, right? I wrote specifications. I didn't write poetry. A very practical man. I had no orientation, nor did I have the ability to really fully describe what was happening to me. It's taken years. When he came 9 months later, I had already been meeting him on the subtle plane, and he invited me to come with him to India. I went to India for 6 years. In that 6 years, I would come back and forth to the United States every 6 months or so. But I began to understand what was happening to me. I mean, literally it was happening, and I was learning to understand it. So I was not seeking anything. It was happening. If there was anything I was seeking, was how to collaborate with it and to understand what it was that was happening. And in the course of the time, the entire history of the Vedas, he trained me as a Brahmin, and I learned to do the ceremonies and the chanting. He taught me his unique interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, which describes, he has his unique interpretation, sees the Bhagavad Gita as a yoga, as a series of steps and processes that we go to that takes us to the ultimate state. All of this became the basis so that my experiences began to stabilize. They became more integral, more regular, more manageable. And eventually my teacher he was an Indian man. He was younger than myself, an international financial consultant who was raised as a Brahmin in India. So, but he was very, very immersed in the tradition of India. And he basically guided me as a guru. And in 2004, he gave me a name and opened up the center for me to begin to manage in Sacramento, California, where I did until 2008, I believe, when the next realization came to me. This next realization absolutely surprised me. I had no idea it existed either. And I penetrated that membrane, and I became to the state where all devotion, all seeking, all teachers, all gurus, the whole spiritual thing was irrelevant. And I recognized that was irrevocable. It was like suddenly the last veil lit, and I realized there was nothing to get, nowhere to go, that I had been the divine forever, and so is everyone else, and that all this fanfare and bliss states and ecstasies I had been experiencing previously, which had, by the way, quieted a great deal, were only the leftovers of something else that was happening. It was as if the real development that was occurring to me was the bow of the ship, and all the bliss and the ecstasy was the wake in the stern of the ship. So something had been happening that was of a different order, and I called that moving into relationship with the Absolute, or Thought. When that occurred, then there was no longer a student, there was no longer a teacher, and I left my teacher, and I had been doing much teaching up until that time, and that's when I began the practices and the teaching I'm doing now, and that gives you the gist of it.
You know, Shree, I was thinking as you were describing your story, and I had mentioned earlier in the program, actually in the opening, is that people will spend years, in a religious practice of one form or the other, or they seek out a guru, if you will, to help them achieve what spontaneously seemed to have happened to you. And my understanding from your own words was also that it seems that it's beginning to happen somewhat regularly, if you will, to people around the world, people that just seem to be like you, going about their day, doing what they believe they're supposed to be doing, just to eke out an existence, if you will, and all of a sudden it just click and it happens, and they realize what I was doing before used to seem so important, but now it just seems small and almost irrelevant. It's like you awaken out of, let's call it the reptilian animal state of existence, trying to basically survive and perhaps thrive, if you will. And then you patch up all the things around, I suppose your soul, your spirit, in such a way that you're actually trying to alleviate the pain that your soul must be suffering because it isn't being allowed to awaken. Well, now that you're not going to allow that, the soul or something happens, such as it did with you, says, you've been doing it all wrong, so I think I'm going to take over from here. Would you kind of say in reflection that's what happened?
Well, I now, yes, definitely. It was clear to me that whatever happened to me was a natural unfolding.
Right.
And that I've recognized that every single one of us are in this process of maturation, if we know it or not, if we're living a human life or a spiritual life, and that life is actually trying to show us what it is we need to experience and meet in order for this to occur. But because of the habit of our ego, the habit of fear, the habit of protection, the habit of getting focused and attached and distracted, we're not there for these lessons, or we're afraid of them. Like fear is some fundamental structure built into the human design. So we don't want bad things to happen, and often the lessons the universe is bringing to us are challenges or difficulties or truly bad things relative to our sense of things. And when I look back to say, well, was there anything I did in my life that was different than other people? Because I've worked with hundreds of people since then, and I am actually acting like a farmer or a midlife. I'm basically assisting people in coming to the right relationship with their own stage, their own maturation. A seed sends out a shoot, and the seed doesn't know, and the shoot doesn't know what's up. All it knows is darkness and moisture, right? But it's going up if it knows it or not. The only time it knows it got anywhere is when it breaks through the soil, and then it's a whole bewildering, different paradigm than what it knew before. So when I look at what it is that I did or how I lived, and I look to share from my own experience, is that it was the willingness to meet the challenges that came in my life and not to bypass them. And I've had a lot of challenges. I was born with a speech impediment. I'm fairly severely dyslexic. I was legally blind until the age of 12 when my parents discovered I couldn't see. I had to teach myself how to do math by doing it 3 times each time I did an equation, because I could never trust myself to come up with the right answer. I had take the average. Whenever I got 2 right, I knew I was there. So I had many disabilities in the course of my life, and I did end up meeting the challenges and creating a life out of that process. And this is pretty much what I teach, because it is a crapshoot. It is a roulette wheel, and we're one little slot on this roulette wheel. And that bouncing marble is spinning, and it may or may not fall into your slot. Mm-hmm. But you can, if enlightenment is an accident, I believe there is a way to become accident-prone. So there is a right attitude, a right orientation that allows for a more natural birthing of the consciousness from its embryonic human identity into the next dimension. Once you step out of the human dimension, it's very interesting, because if we have met the human issues in our life sufficiently, the universe will take over from there. But if we haven't met our issues in life, then the universe forces us to meet those issues. So many people's spiritual awakening is not a pleasant experience. I like to say that no self-respecting ego would choose to enter the spiritual path, because in many ways you can't run away. You can't obscure. You can't retreat back into the pleasures and the pastimes and the distractions of the human life. So it's a maturation that occurs naturally, and learning to collaborate with that is, I think, what can assist people who are awakening everywhere right now. I mean, it's literally, it's as if nature is saying, I need awakened souls on the planet now, and we're ushering in this collective increase in the consciousness, and I believe all of these people are awakening for the purpose. Now, many of these awakenings are misdiagnosed. Many of these awakenings drive people into fear or anxiety, and they go to doctors or psychiatrists, and they end up on medications and suppressing it. So that's not what is the best relationship with this universal unfolding that's occurring. So part of my work, is to try to get the information out that you can grow where you are as a human being just as well as the spiritual path. If you can find the right attitude, the right orientation, like to get the sense of what it's all going towards. Like we're born in the middle of a story. We don't know what its purpose is. You're in the middle of a journey between one place and another without knowing there was a beginning or that there is an end. So to understand the nature of the path, to understand the nature of the journey is where I start. Correct information. If you can know that the universe has a purpose, then you can begin to find out how you can align yourself with that purpose.
It seems that's been one of the greatest mysteries since the existence of humankind, is that we have been in search of, why am I here? And when that seems to hit people, such as it has with you, someone who wasn't really seeking probably that answer, would you say that it was fair, though, that maybe somewhere deep inside and underneath through your life, you were asking that question, maybe not in total conscious awareness, but that you were asking this question, and then all of a sudden you got hit with the answer pretty hard?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. We're unwittingly living the path without knowing it. And this is where you can create the attitude. Instead of paranoia, you can be pronoia. I mean, instead of having a negative attitude about the things that happen to you, you can say, oh, why is the universe showing me this? Oh, look at this, all this crap coming up, all these problems coming up, all these issues arising in me. What is this about? You can begin to change the interpretation, the story that you assign to what's occurring to you. And then that's enough. I mean, because there's a natural fulfillment or happiness, a kind of a return to our original nature when we meet these issues instead of running away from them or distracting them. And those incremental stages that occur were there when we were children, learning to ride a bicycle and learning to interact with other kids, going to high school and relationship. I mean, all of these are developmental stages. It doesn't stop, except unwittingly we get conditioned in our society to stop around our early adulthood. And we get locked into family, work, accomplishment, the American dream, whatever it is that's for us. And we stop growing. Mm-hmm. We end up confining what we're going to let the universe teach us because now we're locked in to a groove. Mm-hmm. This, I think, is one of the reasons that when something true comes through, is often people are afraid of it. Mm-hmm. It feels like it's going to take away or steal away their life or the things that are important to them. And of course, this is what it feels like, unless you can understand that life's purpose is to prepare you, to bring you to a place where, in my experience, the universe can wake up as you. Mm-hmm. It's my experience that the underlying reality can't know itself except through each of us, and that it's actually looking for human beings who have this independent, separate identity to be capable of to hold it so that it can wake up as us. This is my direct real experience, that I am both a personal person, like I am speaking right now to you as a personal person. I'm an impersonal person. That means I can observe myself speaking to you in the way I'm doing it right now, and I can see all the conditioning in my nature that has me talk too much or to be exuberant or be this way. I can see it all. There's no distress that's going on there. And concurrently, I can be universal. I can feel the oneness between you and me, Daniel, and to the listeners, and to everyone who will ever listen to this program, and my connection to nature, to God, to creation, to other human beings. And I can also experience my universal impersonal nature, which is the absolute nothing exists but that, all going on concurrently. Mm-hmm. This is what's possible for the human being. This is what I don't believe people realize is even, it's not just the first awakening. That's just the beginning of a next wondrous series of unfolding. So part of it, that's my message. And when I work with people who are with me, I work with people, most of whom are mature, most of whom are approaching 50 or over 50. Mm-hmm. Because it's useful to have kind of burned out the passions, of our lives and gone through the whole rigmarole to come to the place where there's some wisdom and some humility and some capacity to move into the next level. Mm-hmm. And basically guiding people into what really wants to occur naturally as we get over 50. Right. If we pay attention.
I know that in broadcasting this year for more than a decade that we have been doing Beyond 50 Radio here is that one of the common themes that I see with people who, are approaching midlife is that they grew up with a set of rules and conditions that they were told if you follow these, you might alleviate a fair amount of suffering and you might achieve the things that you want to achieve in life. And they realize, as they have followed these rules and done what they believed they were supposed to do because it's what everybody else was doing, that they feel this sense of frustration. I think the yearning actually perhaps begins in the 30s, maybe even the 20s. But they know that somehow, there's an instinct. There's a natural way we know inside of ourselves that says, something about this just doesn't feel right, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. I don't really want to rock the boat because I've spent time building and nurturing the relationships that I have, whether it's with coworkers or friends in the community, whatever it may be. And I'm going to continue on this, but I know inside, it's sort of that slight irritation that you feel, and you just can't quite put your finger on it. Then at the time we start approaching midlife, you hear about what's known as the midlife crisis, and I think this is one of those things that is almost a creation, of people out there who are trying to say, this is what's wrong with you, but here's the remedy. And this has been going on for quite a long time now. And they get to this point where they realize, wait a minute, what I have been doing that I thought was the right way, each step that I've taken I was told was supposed to be the right thing to do, just doesn't serve me. And I have this longing, and it doesn't matter what station. You could be somebody who's found that everything you did put you out on the street, or everything you did made you a multi-millionaire, but there's a longing. There's just something missing. And it's time for you to shake down that foundation and move in a different direction. Again, I believe this is really something that starts back in someone's 30s, I believe. It begins to ripple, and then it finally magnifies, because by the time we get to that place of being 50, 55, 60 years old, we start realizing our mortality is coming to an end, and we better do something about it fast, so at least perhaps we don't continue with the suffering, if you will, or, that sort of loss where, geez, I've spent all this time, I felt like I've wasted it, but I'm going to do something about it now. And I can see why you would have a lot of people in search of and hopefully finding exactly what it is, the experience that you've had.
Yes, it's not unique at all. I mean, the only uniqueness may be in its specific idiosyncrasies, but my understanding of the nature of the journey has matured quite a bit. I've been doing this for 15 years now. I'm 65. The body is starting to let me know it's not getting dragged around, liking getting dragged around the way I used to doing it. So the mortality is one good measure, because if nothing else, is your life ends. Life is a terminal condition. For every birth there is a expiration date, right? So we all have our expiration date. And how do we move into relationship to whatever it is that expires? What happened? What was it that was there before we were born, and what happens when it expires? And many people tell and share experiences of what occurs when they're in their body having these experiences. So how do we really know? Because anyone who's actually totally left their body, they typically don't come back, although there are cases of it. But my experience is it's a good time to question the assumptions, because, we're born into life children. We totally believe that our parents and the people around us know the reality, know the truth. They're gods to us. And what they tell us and what they instruct us, we take in as gospel. We don't, as children, don't have the discrimination to say, no, this is crap and this is good, and so on and so forth. It usually doesn't come until adolescence. But even then, there are whole areas, if we do rebel or if we do kind of find our own authority, it's usually distorted by things of our human vehicle, desire, and fear, and attachment, and betrayal, and anger, and resentment, and all the other content that runs our identity. And so we're not really free, even though we do have recovered the ability to question and to choose. So without self-inquiry, without understanding the nature of the thing that got you, that you're born into, that you're living, that in many ways is living you, you can't separate the essence of your identity, the essence of what you are. So if people aren't asking questions, if they're not in inquiry, then they're blithely going off the cliff like lemmings, in their season. It's just, okay, when I die, I die. But if you are, then there's these four questions. You mentioned one of them, who am I? And the other one is, why am I here? And what is the purpose of life is the third one. And then the fourth one, which I think is really the essential one, and it's what I focus on, is how do I live? How can I live in such a way that the opportunity of this birth, of my life, is fulfilled? How can I actualize the possibility, the potentiality that I sense is within me that's not being fulfilled in the life I've lived up to now? And that's a very positive urge. it actually arises, in my experience, from the very original urge that created this creation, which is to expand, to grow, to experience, to learn, to evolve, and eventually to wake up to its own nature. So we are all in this flow. And when we're aligned with that flow, in the positive direction of that flow, we're in a field of energy that's positive, where our life feels meaningful. It feels like it's going somewhere. We have more energy. The obstacles and problems don't overtake us. And when we're not, we get diminished. We feel fearful. We feel angry. We feel less and less, constantly struggling. So finding how to get on track, to find the north arrow on your compass, and then to stay on that track, that's the essence, I believe, how to live. Discovering the rules of the game, discovering what choices you actually do have, discovering the nature of the condition of your personality that you believed is you, or the condition of your body that you believe is you. Is there a you? Is your you separate from these things? And what is that nature? And how can you tell the difference? Without this engagement, then it's very, very difficult to fulfill the possibility of a human life.
Mm-hmm. You know, when you think back at the history of mankind, especially when it comes to spirituality, if you will, is that over the many centuries, religion has more or less taught us there have been certain unique individuals that have been blessed or bestowed by the power in the inside of God. And it's through them and only them that this gets shared with everyone else who may, if you follow the rules of whatever that particular person is out there telling you, that you may achieve a bit of this blessing this person has. And I think that's been one of the hardest things to really swallow, is the fact that how come you, of all people, get to be touched by God, if you will? How come you're the exclusive one? And I'm someone who's just supposed to serve you, so to speak. And can you see the inherent reality, though, that with these people that, and it's, you know, not to change your experience, but that who come and say, okay, you know, I want this for myself, and you've said it pretty consistently through the program, we all have this. We just need to figure out how do we open that door so that we can experience this. And I think that's why people like you, as you said, you were sort of a practicing agnostic, and that people probably just like you who really weren't out there seeking. You're just going about your day doing what you think you're supposed to be doing. Bam, you just kind of get hit by a meteorite, if you will, and go, wow, I didn't expect this. This is something. That people like that, it's happening to them because it's breaking down those foundations of the people who were allegedly anointed and appointed as the people who were supposed to show us the way, and they just haven't really been successful through the centuries doing this. So it's time to maybe change the rules a little bit.
Absolutely. You know, this whole idea is, I believe, this a great deal of my work is, you might say, empowerment. It's about people coming to the cause of the life they're living, and then to make their choices and to accept the consequences of their choices. So this whole, attitude of following the teacher in devotion and following all their rules, some people actually are inclined to do that, and there are people like that who come to me this way. Part of what happens when someone comes to this state is there's a tangible transmission. So people are very affected by that transmission. But it is an artificial unless they can come to their own relationship with that same force. So before too long, if someone is with me for a few months, then they realize that they're walking this path, and who's next to them is kicking them in the ass, coaching them, is their ally in their process, but isn't going to do it for them. Mm-hmm. And it's that personal responsibility. It's that self-determination is what I'm observing is really possible here in the West, where in India, it's not. They all submit to the authority. They blindly, ignorantly follow whatever the teacher is telling them or whatever the tradition is telling them. But here in the West, we have this incredible individuality and independence, which creates its own problems. But it's actually in this way, I believe, we can actually, and I'm observing it, that people can make real progress as when they come to responsibility for their own embodiment and for their own issues and for their own content that's arising, that's they're mistakenly projecting onto people around them. This process of coming to responsibility to their own experience is them coming to their own godhood, to their own divinity, to their own reality. So I do see that we have a new kind of spirituality, a new opportunity to engage yourself in a meaningful way, and it can occur while we're in life. And life then can be what it was always meant to be, is the classroom for the next stage of our evolution. And this is my focus. This is my teaching. But it's not to say that I cast out the beautiful energy and experience of love and oneness that comes at one stage of the journey for some people, about half. And that has a role to play in nourishing the evolving soul so that they're encouraged to continue to go on the path. Not everyone has those blissful experiences at all. It can, maybe they're rare, or maybe when they come, the nature is such that it dismisses them and forgets about them. But everybody is traveling on this journey, even if you're not having those kinds of experiences. If you can just be present with the opportunity of your life right here, right now. That, I believe, is always been the fundamental truth of all religion, is that we're all interconnected, that what we do to another affects us, what they do to us affects them, that our actions make a difference, that we all come from the same stuff, that my me and your me is the same me, my sense of individual identity and your sense of individual identity is the same identity, that we share this common reality, that we're all brothers and sisters. This is truth that can be experienced and lived. So much of religion and much of this carries with it these inherent truths. The nature of truth is it's no big deal. You always know that. Truth is never new. It just appears new because you've been in untruth for so long. So the nature of the journey is information's been out there. We just didn't know how to see what was important or relevant to us and what wasn't.
I think it's always been out there. We've always known that, but somehow we became conditioned to not be able to see it like we once did.
Exactly.
That's why I love going to the playground and watching children. You can just see it right there in front of you. You know, they'll bump their head on a monkey bar and they'll cry and rub it for a little bit, but then they get up and they move on with the next experience, and I think, that's as simple as it gets.
They're not suing the playground owner. They're not, it's a whole different way of, this is not our fault, We were born into this. So we all became little carriers of the error of the human evolution. Mm-hmm. So we do need to find those errors when we become self-aware enough and self-determined enough, which, by the way, the later you are in life, the more you can see your responsibility for how your life turned out the way it did. Mm-hmm. And there's a natural wisdom that's there that can take us and point us in the right direction.
I remember some time ago I was interviewing with Lu Wen, who was very well known for at least delivering the message of what is known as the Hawaiian Ho'oponopono. And, fascinating individual, and he very sort of a guy you might talk to next door. You think of something that profound, and people might think of someone who's that pedestal look that we tend to look, but he's just a regular guy that might have a hot dog at a barbecue somewhere with you. But he talked about that very thing that you just mentioned about personal responsibility. And I think the biggest thing, from what I can see, that we need to really start shaking up is this idea of victimhood. You know, that when something bad happens, oh my goodness, fate, God, whatever, you know, has decided this needs to happen, which is probably true, but the point is how you decide to be in that moment when it does. And I keep remembering, for instance, a fifth grade teacher, they used to say, when you have a problem and you decide to take that index finger and point to the reason that problem exists, remember you got three fingers pointing back at you. So you're three times more responsible for why you are in that situation than you pointing at the situation and saying that's the cause of my suffering. And I remember in the fifth grade, I didn't get that quite as well, but through the years I realized, you know, there was a heck of a lot of wisdom in what he was saying.
These truths have been, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. We don't know that this is the gem, and it gets lost in, all the other rocks. So this ability to appreciate these eternal truths is, we usually have to do it long enough until we can figure out that right works, So, in the Hindu tradition, they say this planet is meant for ignorance. This is the only place in the universe where consciousness can imagine it's separate. And then that way it's special, because everything else in the universe knows it's interconnected. It's only here we can make ourselves so miserable. It's only here that Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And that's the purpose of this dimension, is for suffering. In order for us to, and the suffering, of course, is due to separation. Mm-hmm. Separation from our original truth, our original nature, which is everywhere. It's like fish swimming everywhere, looking for water. It is everywhere. Yet we somehow can separate ourselves and think it's just me alone, and there's no one like me who suffers like me or has my problems. It's remarkable. And the universe is in awe. They say, how can they do that?
Here's another thing, too, I was going to point out. As I'm looking at your website, by the way, for the listeners out there, I'm speaking with Shree, and his website is newdharmayoga.com. That's NEWDHARMAYOGA.com, newdharma.com. And I look at your calendar here, and we're going to get into that in just a minute, but that idea of suffering, that we get put here on planet Earth to suffer. But at the same time, the cosmic joke is we have put you on a miraculous planet of biodiversity that is astounding. We have still not found anywhere else, at least in our galaxy or in the universe, even with our technological advances, and we're trying to find another planet with such beautiful biodiversity. We're going to put you right on the planet with everything that you will ever need and more, and you've chosen to suffer while you're on it. That's almost stupid thinking sometimes, don't you think?
You've just described the human condition. Yes.
I think there was Einstein that had once said, there are two things I'm certain that are infinite. One is the universe, and the other is human ignorance. And he says, but I'm not really sure about the universe. Now, I know that you're going to be in Portland, Oregon, and this starts on the 18th of this month, which is September, and you're going to be here for 10 days, I understand. Tell us about that.
Yes. This is, I think, our fourth time coming to Portland. We basically go in and I do a series of satsangs which are thematic. And for example, the first one on the 18th of September is the soul. The next one is the maturation of the soul. The third one on the 25th is the inner peace. And then we do two intensives. And the first intensive is on the 21st, which is a one-day from 11 to 5 program, where I basically transmit in this first one the journey of consciousness. It's the nature of the predicament we find ourselves in, and that we're all on a journey, and that it came from somewhere and it's going somewhere and it has purpose. So basically, that intensive. The next intensive, it's really more transmission. It's really the focus on the nature of true consciousness, this knowing yourself as the eternal, unchanging reality, and dismantling the parts of ourselves, delusions and ignorance that separates us from that reality. So that's a similar schedule, 11 to 5, on the 28th of September. So it looks like it's a total of 1, 2, 3 satsang. I do a series of meditations. It's all on the website. And then these 2 intensives. We do them mostly at the New Wren bookstore in the northwest Portland. And our meditations are nearby, just down the street at the float shop. All that is on the website if you want that information, and you guys are helping us get the information out. And basically, this is my work now, is to let people know that it's all up to something. There's a reason, and to assist people in coming to their own ability to choose and direct their lives.
And if nothing more, Shree, it's to get these people to wake up to the fact, as I mentioned earlier, you've been put on a beautiful planet with very, very tremendous biodiversity. What are you suffering about?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have the Buddha nature. Basically, Daniel, the Buddha nature is the positive nature. Like I say, but that's still a rarity. My experience is, at least half to 3/4 of the people are still wary and suspicious of this universe and its lessons, and doesn't know that that's the opportunity. But you're doing a great work. I want to thank you for doing this. I know that you're getting the message out from many true and good people to the world, and it's got to be really satisfying.
Oh, it's tremendously so, but I have to say to the listeners, too, even though I really respect the compliment that you've given me about the Buddha nature and positive, I still get aggravated, but then sometimes I just step aside and laugh about the fact I was aggravated in the first place.
Aggravation is probably the right relationship to this world. Generalized irritation,
right.
Swim of ignorance.
So I'm going to let you, for the listeners out there, Shree, go ahead and give out your website again.
Okay, it's newdharmayoga.com.
Very good. newdharmayoga.com. You can find out about where this retreat is being held here in Portland, Oregon, and it starts on the 18th of September, so that's coming up here real soon, in the next few days, in fact. Shree, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share not only your story of your own enlightenment, but the possibility that the door is ready to be open for you. All you have to do is just decide if it's time for you to make that happen. And again, thank you for being on the program today.
All right. Thank you very much.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Again, you can find out more about this at newdharma.com. That is NEWDHARMA, yoga.com, newdharmayoga.com. And if you can't get that down, well, you know where you can find it as well. That's at beyond50radio.com, the number 50. Be sure also to sign up for our exclusive updates so you can keep updated with what's going on there in the Beyond 50 world. We want to thank you here for tuning in. I'm Daniel Davis. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.